Welcome to the debate. Today we're tackling really a core disagreement when it comes to effective long-term fat loss. We're challenging some of the, let's say, the standard advice you often hear. And this whole discussion springs from material that points out a pretty significant knowledge gap between typical fitness guidance and what, specialized medical experts and top-tier trainers are actually using.
Right.
So the central question, the real crux of it is this. Is sustainable fat loss primarily about mastering the body's complex hormonal system? Things like insulin sensitivity, cortisol levels, thyroid function? Or is the main foundation still about the traditional things like calorie balance, energy deficit, even if you're, let's say, more aware of the metabolic side? I'll be making the case that getting that hormonal balance right is, well, the true cornerstone. It's the path of what the material calls intelligent design.
Okay. And I'll be arguing for the necessary and, I believe, primary role of managing calories and energy dynamics. Look, hormonal balance is undeniably critical, especially for optimizing metabolic health, breaking through plateaus. I get that. But the basic laws of physics, specifically thermodynamics, well, they remain the absolute bottom line requirement for fat loss to actually happen.
Well, my position really comes from this observation that the typical gym approach, just focusing on workout volume, counting every calorie, endless cardio, it's an incomplete strategy. It often leads to frustration. It feels a bit like trying to fix a really sophisticated engine, say a high-performance one, with just a basic wrench, The fundamental truth, and experts like Dr. Anya Sharma highlight this, is really powerful. Fat loss is not a battle of willpower against calories. It's a conversation with your hormones. And if you're ignoring that conversation, well, you're likely setting yourself up for a struggle. So this means we need to shift from what feels like brute force towards this intelligent design. We have to first address the underlying physiological factors that actually determine if the body's even willing to tap into stored energy. For instance, if insulin sensitivity is poor, high levels of circulating insulin effectively act like a lock on your fat stores, preventing your body from accessing that fuel even when you feel hungry. Then there's cortisol management. If that's overlooked, chronic stress actively encourages the storage of visceral fat, the really dangerous kind around the organs. And crucially, thyroid function acts as the master regulator of your metabolic rate. If it's suboptimal, the engine's essentially running cold no matter how much you cut calories. So a targeted approach, one using things like hormone-balancing nutrition and what's called metabolically supportive exercise, it becomes necessary to actually engineer the results you want.
Okay, that's definitely a compelling way to frame it. And I absolutely agree that optimizing hormones is, well, it's key to getting past those frustrating fat loss plateaus everyone talks about. However, I see it quite differently in terms of priority. While hormonal balance is critical for optimizing how your metabolism works and maybe even making it easier to stick to a plan, the ultimate sort of non-negotiable requirement for losing fat is still achieving and then maintaining a sustainable energy deficit.
The conventional tools, strategic cardio to increase energy expenditure, strength training to build that metabolically active muscle, they are still necessary levers. They help create that deficit. The material we're discussing rightly points out the difference between just a generic workout plan and a truly personalized, science-backed strategy. But the fundamental physics, the actual use of stored fat for energy, that demands the body be in a state where it needs to find energy from within.
Right. So the issue isn't really whether hormones impact the effectiveness of a deficit. They absolutely do. The core issue is that the body still has to be put into that deficit state in the first place. It needs that trigger to access stored fat. As Dr. Marcus Chen puts it, effective protocols need that foundation of deep physiological understanding, absolutely. but that understanding has to ultimately translate into an energy transaction. Hormones, you could say, regulate where the energy comes from and how efficiently that transaction happens, but they don't eliminate the need for the transaction itself.
I understand why you're emphasizing the energy transaction part, but the real tension here, the thing we have to grapple with, is the practical effectiveness of just focusing on the calorie deficit alone versus tackling hormonal balance first. I remain unconvinced that energy dynamics take precedence when the source material explicitly states that if hormones are out of whack, even a significant calorie deficit might lead to slow, frustrating results or even fat retention.
Okay.
That statement alone shows that the body isn't just some simple physics equation, right? Let's zero in on insulin resistance. If insulin is chronically high, maybe from diet, maybe from stress, it directly inhibits an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase, or HSL. HSL is absolutely required to release fat from fat cells so it can be used for energy. So you could create, say, a 500-calorie deficit on paper, but if HSL is effectively shut down because insulin is too high, you simply cannot access that stored fuel efficiently. Your body might burn other, less preferred fuel sources, or your metabolic rate might even drop in response. This isn't necessarily a problem of the deficit being too small, it's a problem of the body's machinery being stuck in storage mode, not release mode.
Right, and I approach that same frustration, those slow, frustrating results people experience, from the angle of metabolic reality. When someone thinks they're in a significant deficit but isn't seeing results, I'd argue that this is often the very definition of metabolic adaptation. It's the body's incredibly efficient evolutionary response to what it perceives as calorie restriction, as a threat even.
In fact, you could argue the success of the hormonal approach you described, like hormone balancing nutrition, lies in how it optimizes the internal environment to minimize those negative adaptive responses. It makes sticking to a necessary deficit psychologically easier and physiologically, well, more effective. By managing appetite and blood sugar, you're helping regulate hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin. So these strategies are essentially personalized tools that make the energy deficit work better, but they aren't some kind of magic bullet that replaces the need for the deficit. I mean, if you fix the insulin issue perfectly, but still consume enough energy to match exactly what you burn, fat loss still won't happen. The hormonal strategy is vital for maximizing the impact of the deficit, yes, but the energy deficit itself remains the fundamental requirement.
Okay, while I can concede that managing hormones certainly helps with adherence and maybe blunts some adaptation, we really need to pivot to the actual practical damage the conventional approach can cause. Because often, it works directly against any potential deficit you're trying to create. I want to reinforce this point. Many standard fitness routines inadvertently ramp up systemic stress. This elevates cortisol, which, as we know, actively drives fat accumulation, especially that dangerous visceral fat. We're often told, push harder, go longer, faster. In the gym, that's the brute force method I mentioned. But if you're consistently doing excessive, really prolonged steady-state cardio, or maybe high-intensity interval training without enough recovery, you risk chronically raising your cortisol. Now, cortisol signals the body to mobilize energy because it thinks there's a stressor, right? But this often leads to breaking down muscle tissue, catabolism, and, crucially, promotes fat storage around the organs. So you might diligently track a 500-calorie burn from your workout, but if the hormonal cost of that activity is chronically high cortisol, you could be hormonally signaling fat storage elsewhere, potentially negating the whole point. The source material specifically calls for stress management techniques as a primary component, which to me proves the mechanism is hormonal first.
That's a very fair point about the dangers of poor programming, absolutely. But surely we need to separate the tool itself from the the incorrect application of that tool, right? I mean, you use the term metabolically supportive exercise. Could you clarify how that fundamentally differs from, say, just conventional strength training? Is it really that different?
The difference lies in the precision and the intent behind it. Conventional strength training often just focuses on volume, maybe chasing hypertrophy. Metabolically supportive exercise, on the other hand, is often periodized specifically to improve insulin signaling, support the nervous system, not just break down muscle. It includes strategies like specific timing of nutrients around workouts and carefully managing training load to avoid that chronic overtraining state that spikes cortisol.
Exactly. So the problem isn't that conventional methods like strength training or even cardio are inherently flawed. The issue lies in the poor programming, the excessive volume or intensity you mentioned, the brute force approach. We're arguing for the primacy of energy dynamics here. Strength training is an absolutely foundational element for maximizing energy expenditure, both during and after exercise, and for boosting overall metabolic rate. We shouldn't just discard effective energy expenditure methods simply because some trainers, perhaps less informed ones, misuse them and inadvertently cause that cortisol spike. The solution seems to be better science informing the programming, not abandoning the fundamental need to move and create a sufficient energy drain on the system.
Well, I'd argue that refinement means redefining the building blocks entirely. Let's dig a bit deeper into what I mean by intelligent design. It goes significantly beyond just tweaking calories and macronutrient ratios. The intelligent approach really focuses on supporting the body's fat-burning machinery, right down at the cellular level. This means understanding the absolutely critical role of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. These are essential cofactors in countless metabolic processes, something almost entirely ignored by the typical fixation on just protein, carbs, and fat percentages.
Okay.
Think about it. If you're deficient in key micronutrients, like, say, magnesium, which is crucial for ATP production and insulin signaling, or maybe B vitamins, which are vital for the thyroid hormone conversion process, well, your hormonal pathways are compromised right there. Your metabolic engine effectively stalls. You could restrict calories until you're blue in the face, but if the essential cofactors needed for the engine to actually burn fat efficiently aren't present, the whole process is going to be incredibly inefficient, maybe painfully slow. This integrated cellular perspective, it goes far beyond the standard personal trainer certification, precisely because it recognizes you need to optimize the cellular environment first before the engine can even run properly, let alone efficiently.
That's a powerful case for optimization, no doubt. And I absolutely acknowledge the profound importance of addressing things like micronutrient deficiencies. Let me try an analogy here, though. Think of fat loss like driving a car across the country. The hormonal balance, the micronutrient sufficiency, that's like ensuring the engine runs efficiently, like you said. It determines your fuel economy, helps prevent breakdowns. That's the advocate's perspective, essentially. But to actually complete the journey, to get from point A to point B, you still have to press the accelerator appropriately and manage your fuel stops. You still need to achieve a net movement forward. And that net movement is the energy deficit. The failure, as I see it, isn't some deliberate conspiracy by the fitness industry to hide the truth that the energy equation doesn't matter. It's more a tendency towards, well, oversimplification in the commercial fitness world. We both agree that personalization, addressing these advanced details like hormones and micronutrients, is crucial for maximizing results and ensuring the body can sustainably access stored fat. But ultimately, the transformation happens through the utilization of that stored energy. So, while the why, the hormones, the biochemistry, is essential for making the transformation possible and efficient, the how, the actual execution through exercise and nutrition, still fundamentally relies on strategically managing energy input and movement output. The underlying physics, well, they still need to be respected.
And this is really where I have to sort of draw the line conceptually. For long-term, truly sustainable success, people need to move beyond that simplistic calories in, calories out framework. It often just frames them as failures when they inevitably hit plateaus or struggle. By focusing first on the hormonal symphony insulin, cortisol, thyroid, individuals can shift their perspective. They move beyond feeling inherently flawed or lazy and become active participants in what feels like an engineered transformation. This focus tends to lead to more consistent, noticeable results precisely because they're finally addressing the root causes of metabolic sluggishness and fat storage, not just battling the symptom of an energy imbalance. It's like they're finally fixing the engine itself, not just arguing about how much gas to put in the tank.
And I would conclude that the real lasting value of understanding these deeper mechanisms, this doctor secret, if you will, is that it provides the sophisticated context and the necessary optimization for the energy equation. Hormonal and metabolic understanding acts like the detailed map. It helps us navigate the incredibly complex metabolic terrain effectively, avoid those common pitfalls and plateaus. But the core journey of fat loss, the actual movement across that map, still requires strategic fueling and physical activity to meet that fundamental energy deficit requirement. So, I think the debate really underscores that the most effective, truly science-backed strategies are the ones that successfully bridge that gap. They integrate the non-negotiable need for an energy deficit with the equally necessary optimization of the hormonal environment.
Yes, I think we can definitely agree that the material we've discussed offers incredibly valuable insights, particularly for anyone who's felt frustrated by traditional methods and is looking for a more intelligent, science-informed strategy for achieving results that actually last.
Absolutely. And ultimately, we leave it to you, the listener, to weigh whether the primary key to sustainable fat loss lies more in mastering those internal regulators, the hormones, or in diligently adhering to the external dynamics of energy balance.